Welcome, everyone, to the We Are In It Together podcast. I am really excited to be here today with Chris Willard. He teaches in the Harvard Medical School and he's a clinical psychologist. And he specializes in it seems like a lot of things, but mindfulness being a primary one. And what we're going to talk about today is post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth. And the book that I read that focused on this of Chris's was the um, how we grow through what we go through. And Chris is a prolific author, so lots of other great books and books for kids, books for helping children with kids. I'd love to have Chris probably back at some future point in time, but
Anytime.
welcome, Chris.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. It's nice to connect. We're kind of buddies on Facebook and social media, and here we are actually virtually hanging out. But it's great to be connected. Yeah.
Wonderful. So I'd like to start by inviting you to tell just a little bit of your story. Like what brought you to the world of mindfulness and what inspired you to share it with others, to share it like intergenerationally. I know you teach caregivers how to teach this to kids. Tell me a little bit about what brought you here.
Yeah, it got started, and if people have listened to me before, you probably heard some of this kind of origin story before, but you know, never heard the word mindfulness growing up. My parents were kind of hippie-ish, but they were not like meditators particularly or anything like that. And I think back to being a kid, and I like to start when I think about teaching with like what were moments of mindfulness before you heard the word mindfulness? Because I think for people that are coming to this new, it's like, oh, this must mean I have to like go to a mountaintop or I have to take weeks off from work or and to me, I think we probably all have these childhood experiences that are like mindfulness before we heard that word. So for me, it was like being with my dad, and I remember actually maybe he had read a book about meditation or something, but he was like, just like pick a cloud in the sky and breathe and try to make the cloud disappear with your breath. And it was like, oh my gosh, like I breathed for 5 minutes and the cloud disappeared, Dad, like magic trick. And it's like, okay, the cloud will disappear either way. But it was like this really cool kind of experience. Or I went to this very sweet nature camp at this like nature preserve close to where I grew up. I was actually just there the other day with a friend and co-author. It was kind of sweet. But I went to the camp there and they were like, we're gonna walk in the woods like as silently as possible, like walk like a ninja. And if you've ever tried to walk silently, especially in the forest, it's like you're focused on each footstep, what's the texture of the ground, how am I moving each muscle, which is very much like the instructions that if you've done mindful walking, it's like pay attention to each muscle, notice each footstep, feel the texture of the ground underneath your feet. And it was like these sort of training wheels almost for mindful walking. And then sit down in the woods, we'll notice all the sounds around us. And that was like a mindful listening exercise. And as you mentioned at the beginning, like I'm a parent, I've got a 10-year-old, a 6-year-old. It's like, now I'm like, I think those counselors are just trying to get us to shut up. But like maybe they were, but at the same time, like it really did plant these seeds so that and that's how I think about teaching mindfulness, really, sort of as Thich Nhat Hanh says, is like planting seeds. We don't always know what's going to grow, but we can, water them and give them sunlight and rainwater and soil to flourish in. So that by the time I was kind of ready to go back to this, I was kind of in my own suffering as a young man. I went off to college for 3 years and then left school. And I sort of joke, is it to find myself or get my together, however you want to put that. But basically was just lost, angry, anxious, depressed, addicted to opiates, like total kind of train wreck. And my parents didn't know what to do with me, and went to treatment, went to, didn't really quite work. And at some point, I guess about a year in, they had gotten interested in mindfulness more formally at that point, and they didn't know what to do with me, and they basically like dragged me on this retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh because they didn't have anywhere else to take me, and it was like totally transformative, like being in these mountains in Vermont. This is 1999, 2000, something like that, and like walking mindfully, eating mindfully, trying to speak mindfully and compassionately, learning how to be in my own head in a way that it felt so scary and so intolerable to live in my own head and to live in the skin in my own body. And like, I felt a little sense of peace. I started to see interconnection, which is a big emphasis in the Thich Nhat Hanh kind of teachings, and seeing sort of how I was harming myself, seeing how, my behavior was harming others, like even the ripple effect, so far away. It sounds like very grandiose, but being like, if I buy heroin, that's contributing to, violence in, Mexico or Afghanistan. I mean, but really sort of seeing that in these profound ways. And as someone who'd always been kind of political and was like, I'm a vegetarian and I'm never going to buy this product, it's like, well, why am I buying these drugs that are doing horrible things? And also, why am I doing this to myself and my family? And again, that sounds a little grandiose, but it actually was a big part of like what started my journey into sobriety, and then, learning more about kind of dharma, compassion, self-compassion, mindfulness, you know, getting some better therapists, getting, into some recovery programs, where, that kind of complemented, I felt like for me, the spiritual path. And I think when a lot of us find this stuff when we're young, we're like fired up. I was like, I'm gonna teach everyone mindfulness. The world will be world peace in 5 years. Those 20 some years ago, it didn't quite work out, but that's really, I was like, I want to share this with other people. Like, this has been so transformative for me, and so that kind of got me going. I spent another year off from school, but kind of actually getting, my shit together and practicing mindfulness and getting into recovery, and, doing the work I need to do on myself, finished my degree, worked as a special educator for a couple years, in a really challenging environment, with kids, and really felt like the education was not for me. I have so much admiration for teachers because I just cannot do it. And it was a therapeutic school, and I was like, those therapists have the easy job. I'm gonna go be a therapist. I went back to school to become a psychologist, and all during that time, how can I fit mindfulness in? Like, does compassion fit in here? And then at some point finding not just mindfulness, but other, kinds of Eastern philosophy, and then, talking with you before we began, like finding self-compassion practices, and it was like the self-compassion stuff was suddenly like boom, like just things moving even, I don't want to say moving faster. I sort of hate the idea of progress or speed, and whether it's recovery or therapy or mindfulness or spiritual practice, but something about the self-compassion work really opened up a lot for me in a new way. And kind of now I'm like, how is this my life? I have these great kids. I get to teach what I love. I get to write books. I get to talk to people like you. Like, life is amazing. So that's my story. So
That is
yeah,
wow, that's
yeah.
amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. And as we chatted about before we pressed that record button here, like we've got some parallels, right? So my journey to mindfulness also began with, some addiction issues.
Hmm.
And I guess for myself, I do think that like the contrast in some ways, like I was searching for something, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
it makes me think about this fact that sometimes having traumatic things can open us up for new possibilities. Even John Kabat-Zinn, full catastrophe living, just this idea that sometimes
yeah.
that void is fertile ground for us being open to something new. So this brings me to like my next question, which is, when I started reading your book, How We Grow Through What We Go Through, I was floored. Like, I always teach that you can have good things and difficult things side by side. I've got a whole curriculum based on that. But you said that post-traumatic stress can coexist and happen simultaneously along with post-traumatic growth. And I thought, whoa, like that just blew my mind. So can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I feel like it's such a wonderful even thought experiment to think, is this possible? And I think, in many ways it's like, and I think post-traumatic growth, I think, is like tricky, and there's a lot of kind of, I don't want things to fall into, toxic positivity, spiritual bypass, sort of like, if you're not growing, there's something wrong with you, right? I want to be really cautious about that, how we talk about this, but I also do really believe, like, there can be so much happening underneath in terms of the spiritual growth, emotional growth, physical growth that we're doing, relational growth that we're doing that we're not aware of, right? Well, at the surface, it may, be still erupting sometimes in ways that look like, these aspects of ourself or our trauma that we're not so happy with, or we're feeling frustrated to keep happening, or we keep kind of falling into in some ways. And so I just find it so hopeful when I started researching the book that, post-traumatic stress happens to, the percentage of the population, right? But, when they experience a traumatic event, but actually more likely than post-traumatic stress is actually post-traumatic growth, and that the two are simultaneous. And I found that really hopeful to think like, yeah, I can, this can really suck. I'm really in the shit right now, but like maybe there is some growing happening. Maybe, those metaphors about the mud and the lotus, or the, I think some of us hear about the caterpillar just turns into goo that's unrecognizable, like, and then becomes the butterfly. Like, it goes through the state where it's like there's no connection between the two, but somehow it comes out the other side as this butterfly. And like, just these kind of miraculous things, and to know that those aren't just metaphors, but those are really happening inside of us is just inspiring. And we need some hope, I think, to keep going through pain and darkness, whether it's external, as we were discussing, or whether it's internal, or whether it's a combination of the two of those. So, yeah, yeah.
Wow, and you just added something new to my knowledge bank. So I know that I'm a big fan of metaphors, and I think you are too. I know you've got a new book that's going to come out in 2025 that, feelings are like farts. So I think that metaphors, similes, like these are so great. We can maybe touch on that later on. But this idea that I guess I never thought about the fact that the caterpillar has to be undone before
Yes.
it can be redone. I always knew it transformed into something new, but I never thought about, oh my gosh, it becomes like a goo-like thing. How scary, right? How scary.
And it's this, like, it's not like, like a frog. Like, I was actually had this very sweet time this summer. We were in Italy in the mountains, and my daughter, and there was this pond, and there's all these tadpoles, right? And I was explaining to my daughter, like, we'll come here every day. We'll actually see the legs getting bigger and the tails getting shorter. They'll turn into frogs. And a caterpillar turning into a butterfly is not like, a butterfly is not a caterpillar that grows wings. It literally, like, turns into goo and then suddenly becomes a butterfly. Like, it's really like, it's amazing. I wish I should have had this metaphor better at hand. Everyone should Google this because it's crazy. So yeah,
Right. So
yeah,
sometimes when we feel like we're becoming undone, that might be the place of rebirth. Like it
right.
is not
Exactly.
necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
Mhm. So one of the things I appreciated about your suggestions in the book is that you acknowledged how sometimes still mindfulness can activate PTSD stuff. And I guess a couple
Hmm.
things here, like before I get to the question. This one is just the whole framework that PTSD and post traumatic growth can coexist made me
Hmm.
less afraid of those moments because I've had trauma, and I appreciate how you say like let's not do trauma comparison because that's kind
Right.
of unhelpful, right?
Yeah.
But I've
Yeah.
had some things in my life that were traumatic, and occasionally I get episodes where stuff resurfaces, and of course I hate that. Right, like
Yeah.
nobody likes those feelings. It surprises us. It makes us feel like we don't have a sense of agency. And of course, my unconscious mind is always like, how can I make sure that never happens again? Right? Like, how do I make sure that like I don't? And so realizing that no, 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 I want to actually allow these things to surface and meet it with resources
Yeah.
so that I can
Yeah.
heal is really helpful. So I just want to say that that concept in and of itself has made me less afraid of those moments when stuff surfaces.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, I also know that when part of being self compassionate is not making ourselves overwhelmed on purpose, right? And trauma, post traumatic stress can be traumatic. And so for some people, still practice can activate old stuff, maybe more than we can metabolize, handle. Can you
Hmm.
talk a little
Hmm.
bit about that, what you've seen in your practice, and how more active practices, like I think you called it purposeful breathing or
Hmm.
mindful movement, how these can
Yeah.
maybe be helpful for people that get activated in a way that does not feel good and they cannot handle well when they do these stillness practices?
Absolutely. My friend Ron Siegel talks about, who does a lot of mindfulness and psychotherapy training. He talks about kind of coarser objects of attention and more abstract objects of attention. And the more abstract we are, like, focus on your thoughts, or sort of like open up, or like go deep into your body, eyes closed. Like, that's like really throwing the gates open of a lot for a lot of us. And like, even if we don't have major trauma, it's like, going into the attic with a flashlight and it's like, whoa, there's a lot up here. And so, when we have some of those practices that are more internally focused, that are eyes closed, that are, less to kind of hold on to, I think it can oftentimes for people lead to that, kind of, memories and triggers and, other challenges like that, because it's really like being at sea without an anchor. And so having an anchor then that's like a, quote unquote coarser object of attention can be really helpful. So, for a lot of people, sensory practices, taking a moment to listen to five sounds, taking a moment to take a look around the room. How many colors of, red can I see? How many objects that are red can I see? Or outside, how many shades of green can I see in the forest? Um, or things like, you know, very literally grounding ourselves, feeling our feet on the ground. And I think it was Jess Morey who taught me, like, I think when I was like doing public speaking and nervous, she's like, Chris, if the anxiety's up in your head, what's the farthest place from your head? It's like, okay, my feet. It's like, okay, so take a moment, just press your feet into the ground, right? I am where my feet are. Right? Is the ground hard or soft? Are my shoes tight or loose? Are my socks dry or damp? Warm or cool? Like, that is kind of bringing us to the edges of our body, which is really different than like close your eyes, go deep inside your body, which of course for anybody that it's had sexual trauma, medical trauma, physical trauma, violence trauma, like of course the body is going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be dysregulated. It's going to be scary. It can feel like it's betrayed us even if it hasn't. And so starting there is not where we want to start. Ultimately, my hope and wish for all of us who've experienced trauma in our bodies is that we do enough work that we find, ourselves at some point at peace with our body, able to close our eyes and go deep within our body. But that's not, I don't think, where we necessarily want to start. And even if it's like our goal, it doesn't have to be like a goal that's like, I'm like a goal. I guess I don't want to say goal, but like aspiration or intention to get to that place. We're still always making progress, whether we reach it or not, and giving ourselves, that credit along the way. And I think movement is another one. And I was actually talking about this with a friend this morning, but about like, whether it's yoga, which it sounds like it's been for the two of us at different points, or hiking or walking or other movement practices, poses, tai chi, right? All of these things, even dance, I think, right, we know can be so healing to help us feel re-embodied, safe in our bodies again in these different ways. And one of the things I feel very lucky about is I get to travel a lot for work, and it opens up these kind of funny questions in different places. In Argentina, it's like, is doing tango mindfulness, or other people are often like, is my running practice mindfulness? And in some ways, or is drumming mindfulness, and in other places. And in some ways, like, I don't know. I mean, like, we can, I feel sort of like you can drum mindfully, you can dance mindfully. I don't know if it's exactly mindfulness. And I do think one of the things that's happened is that we've taken drumming, dancing, these other actually very healing practices. We just haven't studied them, but we've like poured a bunch of money into mindfulness, right? But it's also like maybe because some of these other practices are, not, done by white men as much. So that's probably part of it too. But I bet if we studied those other movement practices, we would find that they're just as healing as still mindfulness practices. And I do think, especially when we want to teach young people, we can't just sit still. Like that is just so hard to do. It's hard for us adults to do. So forget it if we're teaching young people. but mindful movement. And again, whether it's, like let's take a walk in the woods and notice the sounds around us, or try to walk silently, or whether it's let's notice the different colors, or, during the pandemic, I thought a lot about, like, I just try to walk as much because I was going a little stir crazy, but like it was springtime and it's like, oh my gosh, like all these birds, and there's different birds at different times of day. I'd never noticed that before. And the street smells different today. Oh, like this flower is now flowering here today that wasn't in bloom last week. Like when we even just slow down and get in touch with our senses, right, we actually end up, having this different relationship to the world, and it kind of invites a more mindful interaction and relationship with not just ourselves, but our surroundings, the people, places, and things around us, too. So that was a very abstract answer there. I got off.
Well, no, well, and I appreciate the awareness of the body, the awareness of the five senses. And I do know for me too, with yoga as an entry point, that was my first anti-anxiety practice, right? Like, but
Hmm.
I was one of those people that would sit in shavasana at the end and I'd be like, he, and the teacher would say, relax. And I was like, yeah, that's inaccessible. Right.
Where's
And
that relax
so
button?
right. And so
Yeah.
I loved it when I learned mindfulness and I learned like it's okay to not relax. And I was like, that actually made me relax, right? Because I wasn't trying to make myself relax. But
Right.
it makes me think about some of the other, again, what we might call purposeful or intentional practices where we regulate, right? Like so you talked about progressive muscle relaxation or kind of squeeze and release or squeeze and soften, like I call it with kids, and how
Yeah.
that might be a better way to get body awareness because we're not just passively observing, we're actively engaging muscles and then
Yep.
softening and noticing contrast. And then the
Yeah.
same with breathing, right? So I, before I meditate actually on a daily basis, I have a set of breathing practices I go through. Because if I just go for my day and sit, all I notice is how dysregulated I am. And I know that can be a practice, but it doesn't feel self compassionate.
Yeah.
But if I do a set of breathing practices, I kind of work that whatever that stuff is through my system,
Hmm.
and then my system settles down. And now I can observe in a way that feels more peaceful, which I personally prefer. I know both are valid ways to practice, but I like the
Hmm.
second. So can you just
Yeah.
talk a little bit about those purposeful practices or the ways that we can actively engage? Because I know also you said being active rather than passive is sometimes really important when it comes to recovering from trauma.
I think so too, because it's about empowerment, right? If you think about, I mean, I remember just like very carefully like looking at like what are all the symptoms in the DSM or the ICD about post-traumatic stress, and it's like what's very consistent is like feeling out of control, a situation where I felt out of control, and a situation. Yeah, well, let's start with that with an unpredictable, right? So we start with out of control, and it's like, well, how do we then, almost sort of serenity prayer style, like control the things we can? Well, we can't really control them, but how do we, like, ultimately that's true, but like, how can we maybe deliberately regulate our breath in a different way? And I think one of the things, I think with breathing, mindful breathing, I think of as just like observing our breath, but that can be a little triggering. So it's because I think for a lot of people, it's like, am I breathing wrong? People that are a bit more anxious or perfectionistic. I'm breathing wrong. Or, there's something wrong with my breath. It's jagged or the cold. But if we just kind of actually, regulate our breath, what we've learned is that like when you regulate your breath, you regulate your body, you're regulating your nervous system, you're regulating your brain, and then you're regulating your emotions, your focus and your attention and your impulses as well. So just learning how to be with the breath and just like even slowly. I mean, I really find like I like this. I don't know where I got it from, like to give credit, but just like stretch your breath. Like often it's, when we're anxious, it's right. You just gently stretch your breath, each breath a little bit longer than the one that came before it, staying curious about our breath, right? Rather than judging our breath, right? Just getting curious. What's it like when it extends a little bit? How's my body feel as I stretch my breath a little bit? And try stretching the exhale a little bit more like that. We have a shorter exhale, excuse me, longer exhale, shorter inhale. That's actually what starts to settle the nervous system out of the fight or flight response. So, that sort of deliberate thing then feels empowering. And again, we're sort of feeling a little bit of like, maybe I can, have a little bit of control or influence anyway over some things in my life. I mean, I think that's why, I kind of think about the pandemic today. I don't know why. I think we don't want to think about it anymore, but I think why so many people got, like, I'm going to control where I live. I'm going to like repaint my house. I'm going to control the garden as much as I can. I'm going to re-alphabetize the books. Like, but that kind of thing, I think that's what trauma does. And I think when we do find that in the healthy way, kind of can control what we can and we make our lives predictable, I think, routines are really important for recovery of any kind. Because things being unpredictable has what's, kind of led to trauma. So making things more predictable, I think, is so important. Feeling helpless too. I think, and I talk about this in the book, but like helping others. It's like if you feel helpless, one of the best things we can do is help others. Like transforming, you don't have to be cured. Like you just have to have like some wisdom. And we all have some wisdom from our experience that can be of help to others who are at different points or places on their recovery journey. Again, whether it's trauma recovery, substance and addiction recovery, anxiety recovery, depression recovery, grief recovery, right? All of these kinds of things, right? We do actually have something to offer, and that actually then in turn builds our sense of self-esteem and self-worth. It's like, oh, I have something to contribute here. Um, but I got a bit away from breathing again. I'm going off here.
Oh, but they're all and actually the way that you linked some of this stuff, I appreciate it because I feel like oftentimes when mindfulness is presented, it's presented as this solitary endeavor.
Yeah,
And one of the things I
right.
appreciated again and again throughout your book, you said you can practice this and better yet, practice it with somebody else.
Yeah.
And you emphasized a lot of the interpersonal. And I know for myself, when I am really stressed, I do not meditate. I call a friend. Do you know what I mean? Like I call a friend and I
Yep.
bring my nervous system down to like my window of tolerance and then I can use my resources. But it's the interpersonal that I rely upon first when I'm out of my what we call the window of tolerance or my ability to like
Hmm.
hold it mindfully with a regulated body, right?
Right, right. And I think this to me is I think what we're finally doing in the kind of mindfulness self-compassion world is that, I think when it kind of first came, to the quote unquote West or to the States and in Western Europe, there was a real emphasis on, like go to the meditation center, sit silently, don't talk to anybody, leave. And yet and it's the opposite of what we need. I mean, it's like what we need is like a community where we have some time in silence together, but we also have some time in conversation, and we have some time in connection in these both verbal ways and nonverbal ways because we do our healing in connection, and it's so important about that. So yeah, yeah, I think it's so important that we find these ways to connect with others and that meditation centers, meditation retreats have a lot of time for silence, but also have this time for connection because it's the glue that holds us together. And it's also the stuff of healing, I believe more and more is in our relationships, in our communities, in our sanghas, right? Whatever it is that we call them, that's where we do our healing. It's like, my friend Sarah King talks about this sort of like collective nervous system, right? And we know this also from the research as one person heals, right? The people around them actually heal, with some bumps in the road, of course, and some, two steps forward, one step back, but all of this, starts to move everybody forward. One person in a family gets better, right? System gets out of whack, but eventually it finds its way again. Um, and especially when it relates to mindfulness, whether it's sort of the stories of, the one calm person in the boat that Thich Nhat Hanh would teach about, who was able to keep everybody else calm, right? Or whether it's just looking at the neuroscience and measuring people's nervous system levels when they're around someone calm and how it actually trickles out as well. So it's so powerful, this healing in community, healing in relationship thing that our society is not set up for, as a more individualistic society. But I do feel like generationally that's starting to change, and I feel really hopeful about that, despite being someone who likes time by myself and I'm kind of an introvert. Like being with people is kind of like medicine. I guess got to do it. But, yeah.
Well, and one of the things that I appreciated, I started reading your book, Growing Up Mindful, and I know you have a program for parents or and also
Hmm.
educators or clinicians who want to help kids grow mindfulness skills. I appreciated that you started off by saying you need to have connection. And a lot of the people who listen to this podcast are parents, right? So
Hmm.
you need to
Hmm.
have connection with the child before you teach them mindfulness. And if you don't have connection,
Yeah.
like work on that. And if you can't get that right, like get some
Yeah.
resources. But just this idea that connection is foundational for safety, for trust, for
Yeah.
exploration. And we have to have that before we go to like skill building and stretching our boundaries.
Right. Big time. I mean, it is like, I mean, my work for so many years was like, come to our school and show us how to teach kids mindfulness or teach my kid mindfulness and like realizing, actually, and it kind of back to what I was saying at the beginning, like planting seeds needs soil and rainwater. It's like, it's like the soil is the family, the rainwater is the teachers and the other community members, and the sunlight is like, that's like we need that. And as I often joke, it's like if you want stressed out, miserable kids, it's easy. You just surround them with stressed out, miserable adults, like whether it's in a school, in a family. If you want to have the hope of compassionate, mindful kids, you absolutely have to surround them with compassionate, mindful, kind of present adults. And so it really does. And again, like the research on like, yeah, it's cool if you teach kids to meditate, but it actually might be better if you teach their parents to meditate. It's cool if you teach your classroom to meditate, but like the results might be just as good if just the teacher learns how to meditate and practice mindfulness and compassion. Like I know as a therapist, I spend some time teaching mindfulness to my clients, but I know that the best work happens on the days that I remember to meditate, myself, not the days that, I'm making my client meditate in the chair. Like that truly it's like what kind of presence are we cultivating in ourselves? Because that then really is that interpersonal medicine, that attachment stuff, that kind of figure in their life where it really does kind of have that kind of contagion effect that ripples out nervous system to nervous system. And then from there, of course, then we build on teaching, here's a hot chocolate breath or a superhero breath or whatever it might be, but it really does have to start with us. And so the percentage of my time now, like in a workshop that's like skills for kids to like skills for grown-ups, and they're kind of always a little like do we have to do this? It's like sorry, but again, we just have to teach it in an embodied way. I mean, I can't be like, Jamie Lynn, focus on your breath. Like, that's just not gonna help. And yet, I've also had those words come out of my mouth too. It's like, Leo, just breathe. It's like, oh, okay, no. Take a breath. Me, hey, do you want to breathe together? Okay, you don't want to. Okay, well, I'm gonna breathe anyway. Like that's where we need to start this. And yeah, that's the only
Yeah.
parenting hack is calming ourselves down. So like the
Right.
only
Yeah.
parenting, the only real parenting hack is grandparents, which is true. But I think the other only parenting hack is calming ourselves down.
Absolutely. And I do teach, like when I teach parent-child self-compassion. That's actually my specialty is intergenerational. And then I do teach in schools. And what I've noticed when I go into schools is that it works well when the teacher buys in. But if I'm
Yeah.
that outside person, the kids will do it. Actually, it's a really fun curriculum I have,
Uh-huh.
but the amount of transformation in the classroom is so minimal, right?
Yeah.
Because we really
Yeah.
need that adult. And I
Yeah.
think it's also important for adults, adults who are listening maybe right now that think, oh my God, but I'm not mindful. Oh my gosh, but I'm not this. It's like, well, self compassion means we're on the learning team. So part of what we can model for
Exactly.
kids is like,
Yes.
I am not calm. Like you can be mindful of that. Like, I think
Right.
I need to walk. Or I need, like, and again, if we're not there, naming, I am not
Yeah.
there, and then seeing how much we
Yeah.
can couch that in mindfulness and compassion, or I need to call a friend because I
Yeah.
am having feeling, so again, like if we're not there, no, we don't need to shame ourselves for that. We need to
Right.
to hold that with mindfulness and self-compassion so that our kids can see when they're not there, they can hold that with mindfulness and self-compassion.
I love that so much because I actually still get caught up in like I need to like I need to calmly say I'm upset and need space, but it's like no, I can be like I'm upset and I need space. Like that's actually okay because it's so much more authentic and human. Like actually, that just opened me up to having a little more compassion for myself. Oh,
And
Mom.
interestingly enough,
Well, thank you.
my 16-year-old likes that. Like if my 16-year-old is stressed and I name, "You're feeling really upset," she is about to like, like backhand me. But if I say, "You are so stressed," she's like, "Yes, I am." And we connect because I'm not trying to be this, it's hard when your parents a mindfulness teacher for,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like it's hard.
Right. Right.
They actually appreciate when I'm a human rather than a little Zen master that like is like somehow above, because it can feel like it's like you're above them, right?
Totally. Oh my gosh, I brought my son with me. I was doing some work in Vancouver and I love traveling and I've always wanted to bring my kids. Like, and I get to do to sometimes when we had like a father son, I was like, I've got 3 talks out here. We're gonna do kayaking and hiking and it was very funny because he like came to my talks and he's like giving me notes. I'm like, whoa, dude. But he was like he was like, Dad, you always like go on stage like and you like talk about being calm and being mindful, but you're so nervous beforehand. And I was like, thanks, dude. Like, way to call me
Aw.
out. He also gave me some other notes, which was pretty funny. He's like, you always say I'm a big fan of. I was like, okay, gotta take that one out of my vocabulary.
Why not? Why not? Right? These are your phrases. Oh, that's cute though. He's watching. Kids are always watching, right?
Right, right, totally,
So tell
totally.
me a little bit about like if you have any last tips for parents or caregivers, and then also what you're up to next. So anyways, if you want to kind of tie it
Yeah,
off with any last
absolutely. I
words, and then
mean,
tell us what you're up to now.
yeah, I'm such a believer in. I'm a big believer in. God,
You're a big fan of. You're a big
got
fan
me.
of. Yeah.
I mean, I do think the more you can do for yourself, and it doesn't, and like again, as parents, it's like I don't have time to go on like a retreat or like hire a babysitter to even like do like a day-long workshop is like really hard. But it's like it is that like I've been giving this example a lot lately of this dad I work with who's got a very special needs son, and we finished up working a while back, and I was like, "What was the most helpful thing we did?" And he was like, "Chris, you were like." The most helpful thing that we did was you said like drive home from my crazy job, park in the driveway, get in the driveway, turn off the car and just take 3 breaths and then just walk into the house. And I don't know if I'm bringing calm into the house, but at least I'm not bringing more chaos into the house. And I used to always bring more chaos in. And so it really is like take that, turn off the car, take 3 breaths before you walk in. Like, first thing in the morning, can you take a few breaths? Like while the kids are, like I used to joke, like 22 minutes of mindfulness while the kids are watching Daniel Tiger, right? But like when you've got that, or even if you take 2 minutes, but those little things do add up. I really believe that. And they keep the seed watered so that when the kids are out on like a day-long play date or out of the house for the night, it's like, oh, maybe I will go to that, like couple-hour workshop today, and the seeds are watered, and it's not like, oh, my mindfulness muscle is rusty. And I also just am such a believer in self-compassion for parents that a friend of mine talks about parenting crimes and misdemeanors, and it's like that we learn how to like, kind of pardon ourselves for those parenting misdemeanors that we make every day. But it's like just feeling that critical voice that's like it's our in-laws and it's the parenting books that we read and it's the other parents on the playground and we've internalized those voices. And I think for women in particular, this is like, the level of, mommy shaming that goes on out there and sort of, gender roles is so hard, and learning how to let go of that voice, be kinder to ourselves, so that we can also like have kids that grow up without that critical voice. And I love that you're out there teaching this to parents and kids at the same time. I feel like that's such an amazing, beautiful way to teach this stuff. And so I'm such a, self-compassion believer these days. And it's never too late to start. Start small, right? One little thing, learning how to forgive yourself, or learning how to activate a more compassionate voice, is just so powerful for us to live our lives with ease and appreciate ourselves and our family time in such a different way. Um, yeah, and then the other things I'm up to, I just finished a book with a couple of friends about mental health in the college years. Actually, there's very little about mindfulness in it, but it's, I think, because college was such a train wreck for me that it really feels like a gift that I get to share. Sort of, we interviewed hundreds of students and professionals and parents kind of about challenges during that time. So it's full of student voices, parent voices, caregiver voices, just kind of thinking through what that transition is like and how to get the health, the care and support that you need because it's such a the mental health epidemic that we see globally and that we really see nationally. It really is hitting teens and kind of the emerging adults, college age people, really the hardest. So I feel excited about that. Will be next spring. The Fart Book next spring, and then always doing some online teaching and stuff like that. So always busy. um,
Yeah, well, I see you. I see you on social media. I'm like, and now he's in Poland, and now he's in. I think you were like Korea, and then you were like in like I think Iceland or something.
yeah, I
Where
was
were
in
you at?
Iceland. Yep. Yeah,
Yes.
that's when we
Oh,
started
oh my
emailing. I was in
gosh, this
Iceland.
dude is
Yep. Yep.
everywhere. Wow, it's great.
Yeah, I feel so blessed. I feel just so blessed I get to share this stuff in different places and across different cultures. It's so rewarding and fun. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And if people want to learn more about your work or follow you on social media, where should they go?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I don't know, too old for TikTok or think I am, but it's at Dr. Chris Willard, Dr. Chris Willard, on Instagram and same with Facebook and LinkedIn. And then my website is drchristopherwillard.com, drchristopherwillard.com. And then sort of like speaking and professional things, I have a website called enlightenedlivelihoods.com also. But yeah, this is so nice to like sort of having known you just online, but to actually get to chat. So thank you for having me. This is really sweet. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. And anyways, just lots of great nuggets and appreciate you sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, you bet.
The world keeps turning, things change. We have new obstacles that are thrown in our way. In our way. You can't let it hold us down. Together we'll get around. You just have to look inside, and you will find that we are in it together. I know within my heart you are not alone. You are not, and we are in it together. I've known it from the start. You are not alone. You are not alone. You might feel lonely and down. You might be thinking things will always be this way. Be this way. But you got a friend in you. Self-compassion will get you through. You just have to look inside, and you will find that we are in it together. I know it in my heart. You are not alone. You are not, and we are in it together. I've known it from the start. You are not alone. You are not alone. We've got Bunny. You're not alone. Doodles, what can you do? Spots, we can be aware. And Snuggles, I care about you. When life gets hard.